The coffin was too small for my 9-year-old son, and as the dirt hit the wood in that empty cemetery, my phone lit up. Not with comfort, not with condolences, but with a picture of my brother in a tuxedo raising champagne under golden chandeliers. My parents were beside him smiling, celebrating his wedding, while I stood alone burying my boy. I am Daniel Carter, and this is how my family turned their backs on my son's funeral, and then tried to steal his legacy. That was the only thought running through my head as I stood in the cold wind at Fairview Memorial Cemetery on the edge of Denver. My son's coffin sat above the open earth, its polished wood catching a dull reflection of the cloudy sky. 9 years old, and the box they lowered him into looked more like something meant for a child's toys than for a life that had been my everything. My hands shook as I tightened my grip on the folded program the funeral home had given me. I could not read the words. The letters blurred and I pressed my eyes shut, fighting back the wave that rose from my chest. Around me the cemetery was silent. No line of cars, no row of relatives, no crowd of friends. Just me and Angela Brown, my 70-year-old neighbor wrapped in a gray coat with a scarf pulled tight around her neck. She had lived across the street for 20 years, and somehow she was the only one who came. She laid a hand on my arm as the pastor spoke the final prayers. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the wind. "Daniel, you're not alone." But I was. The pastor's words drifted into the air and vanished. I felt nothing holy in them. My eyes locked on the coffin as two workers began to lower it, the ropes straining against the weight. My legs almost gave out. That was my boy, my Ethan. 9 years old, with eyes too bright for this world, a smile that carried me through days when I thought I could not keep going. I pressed a hand to my mouth, stifling the sound that wanted to break out of me. Angela squeezed my shoulder. When the ropes finally settled and the coffin disappeared beneath the level of the earth, I felt like the world had shut its last door. The sound of dirt hitting the wood followed a dull thud that seemed to crack through my chest. I turned away, my breath ragged. I needed to stand to keep my knees from buckling. My phone buzzed in my pocket. At first I ignored it, not willing to break the silence of the moment, but it buzzed again, and something in me, maybe habit, made me pull it out. The screen lit up with color. It was Instagram. A photo floated up at me, posted just minutes ago. My brother Michael stood in the ballroom of the Grand Horizon Hotel downtown. He wore a sharp black tuxedo, his smile wide and proud, a champagne flute raised high in his hand. Around him, guests cheered, glasses glimmering under crystal chandeliers. My parents stood beside him, my mother's hair perfect, my father's tie neat, both of them radiant with joy. The caption beneath read, "To family love and new beginnings." The phone trembled in my grip. The sound of the earth falling into the grave behind me clashed with the image of my brother's wedding toast happening at the same moment just miles away. Angela tilted her head, noticing the way my hand clenched around the phone. "Daniel, are you all right?" I shoved the phone back into my pocket. My throat burned. They weren't here. Not one of them. Not my parents. Not my brother. Not anyone who shared my blood. They had chosen that hotel ballroom over this grave. The workers were already shoveling the dirt rising over the coffin that held my son. Each scoop was a reminder not only of what I lost, but of who decided it was not worth their time. The cold pressed against my face and I lowered my eyes. Angela stood with me until the last of the dirt was packed down. She whispered something about faith, about holding on, but the words slipped past me. All I could see was Michael's glass raised high, the reflection of chandeliers in the gold of his champagne, while my boy's name was being spoken into the earth. I stayed until the workers left, until only Angela and I remained. The cemetery stretched empty in every direction. I touched the fresh mound of earth, my fingers sinking into the loose soil, and I whispered my son's name. Ethan. When I finally turned to leave, the phone vibrated again in my pocket. I did not look. Not yet. I knew it was them, and I knew whatever it said would burn worse than silence. Angela walked beside me, slow and steady, as we headed toward the parking lot. Behind me, the wind rustled the trees over the grave, carrying away the last echo of the thud of dirt on wood. I kept my eyes forward. The world had already turned its back. The smell of antiseptic is something that never leaves you. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still feel it clinging to my clothes, sharp and sterile, like it wanted to erase every trace of life. That was the smell of the children's oncology wing at St. Luke's Hospital in Denver, the place where my son spent the last 8 months of his life. Ethan Jr. had been diagnosed in late spring, a rare blood disorder, the kind of words no parent ever wants to hear. I remember the doctor's face, calm and rehearsed, like he had given this same speech 100 times before. But for me, the world tilted, the floor dropped, and everything after sounded like it was coming from underwater. My boy took it differently. He sat on that hospital bed, legs swinging because his feet could not reach the floor, wearing a red superhero t-shirt he refused to take off. He looked at me and said, "Dad, it's okay. I'll be strong for both of us." I wanted to cry, but I nodded instead. He needed me to be the strong one, yet somehow he was the one holding me together. The months that followed were a blur of hospital rooms, of 4 lines, beeping monitors, and the constant shuffle of nurses. Ethan wore his courage like a second skin. He let them slide needles into his tiny arms, grimacing but never breaking down. Once, as the nurse inserted the line, he clenched his teeth and said, "See, Dad, not even Superman would cry." I smiled through tears, squeezing his hand, knowing inside that it should have been me lying there, not him. I remember walking the long hallways at night when he finally fell asleep, staring at the vending machines. Because I had no appetite, my stomach twisted in knots. I kept waiting for someone from my family to appear, a familiar voice to say, "You're not alone." But no one came. Not my mother, not my father, not my brother. Angela did. That 70-year-old woman who lived across the street somehow became my lifeline. She brought me homemade sandwiches wrapped in foil, still warm when she handed them over. She would sit with Ethan, reading him stories while I went down to the chapel to breathe. She told him about her late husband, about how heroes came in all sizes, and Ethan listened with wide eyes like she was telling him the greatest story ever written. One afternoon, while Ethan was hooked up to a transfusion, Angela leaned toward me and whispered, "Daniel, I know your family hasn't come, but you're not invisible. You matter. He matters." I nodded, unable to speak, my throat clogged with something heavier than words. The seasons changed outside those hospital windows. Summer burned into fall, and then the first flakes of snow drifted down. Each season seemed like a marker, another proof that Ethan was still fighting. He would point at the snow and say, "Maybe I'll build a snowman this year." I told him, "Of course you will." Even though I knew in the back of my mind he might not see another December. We had small victories. Days when his blood counts were stable, when the doctors let him walk outside in the courtyard holding my hand and staring at the sky as if it was brand new. He told me once, "I think when kids get sick, God gives them extra courage tokens." I laughed softly, brushing his hair back, and told him he had more tokens than anyone I had ever known. There were also nights when his pain was so sharp that he curled into me, trembling, his body frail in my arms. He would whisper, "Just don't leave me, Dad." I never did. I stayed awake, watching the monitors, counting each breath he took. The hospital became our whole world. I stopped going to work, stopped answering friends, stopped checking anything outside those walls. It was just me and Ethan, and sometimes Angela. I kept waiting for my phone to buzz with a message from my family. Maybe a text from my mother asking how Ethan was doing. Maybe my father saying he would stop by. Maybe my brother Michael checking in. But the silence stretched on and on, heavier than any diagnosis. One night in December, after another round of treatment, Ethan asked me if his grandparents were coming for Christmas. I lied. I told him they were busy but loved him very much. He nodded, accepting it, and closed his eyes. When I left the room, I broke down in the hallway, pressing my fist against the wall until my knuckles bled. Angela found me and wrapped her arms around me. She was smaller than me, but her strength in that moment felt unshakable. The new year came, and with it the reality I had been dreading. The treatment stopped working. The doctor spoke carefully, but the truth was clear. We were running out of time. Ethan still smiled. He still wore his superhero shirt, now faded from too many washes. He told me one night, "Dad, if I don't make it, can you promise me something?" I swallowed hard, holding his hand. "Anything, buddy," he said. "Make sure you keep helping kids like me. I don't want this to just end." I promised. I promised with every piece of me that I would. The end came on a cold morning in February. He was lying in bed, eyes half open, voice faint. I sat beside him, stroking his hair, whispering that I loved him. He whispered back, "Love you too, Dad." Then he was gone. The silence in that room was unbearable. The machines kept beeping, the nurses moved gently, but my world had stopped. Now, standing at his grave, all those memories poured through me like water through broken glass. The months of pain, the small victories, the endless courage of a boy who deserved more than the life he got. As Angela and I walked back toward the parking lot after the burial, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my hands still trembling. A text glowed on the screen. "Jason Walker, my best friend since college." The message was short. "Sorry, man. Couldn't make it today. Busy with work." I stared at it, my chest tightening. Another absence, another reminder that when my son needed a village, it had been reduced to one old woman and his broken father. I put the phone away and kept walking, the sound of gravel crunching under my shoes echoing the hollow rhythm of my heart. By the time I got home from the cemetery, the sun had already dipped low behind the mountains. The house was dark and quiet, as if it too had given up. I set my keys on the counter, sat heavily in the chair by the window, and let the silence press in on me. My phone sat on the table, its screen black, but I could feel it waiting. I dreaded what it might hold. Hours passed in a haze. I stared at the framed photo of Ethan Jr. on the mantel, his gap-toothed smile frozen in time. The exhaustion in my body was bone deep, but sleep would not come. Then the phone vibrated, once, twice, relentless. I picked it up and looked. The message was from my mother, Linda Carter. The words burned into me as I read them. "Tomorrow bring Ethan's trust papers. Michael needs to finalize the wedding expenses. This is important for the whole family." My chest tightened. My son had been in the ground for less than a day, and that was what she chose to say. Not "I am sorry," not "How are you holding up?" Not even "We loved him." Just money. I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking. Rage rose in me like fire, clashing with the grief that had not yet settled. I picked the phone back up, my thumbs moving without hesitation. "I just buried my son. I will not talk about money." The reply came quickly as if she had been waiting. Do not be dramatic. This is something Ethan would have wanted. The words blurred in front of me. My son who had asked me to promise that I would help other children not bankroll his uncle's wedding. The audacity made me sick. I stood up, pacing the living room. The floor creaked under my feet. I wanted to throw the phone against the wall to shatter it the way my family had shattered any sense of loyalty. Instead, I sank back into the chair, my hands gripping the armrests. The memory of Ethan's voice came to me, small but certain. Dad, make sure you keep helping kids like me. He had not said, Dad, give my college money to Michael so he can throw a party. He had not asked me to hand over his future to people who could not even stand beside his grave. Angela had left a casserole on the counter earlier. I could not eat. The smell of baked cheese turned my stomach. I poured a glass of water and tried to breathe. The phone buzzed again. My mother had sent another message. Do not make this difficult. The family needs you to cooperate. Family, the word felt poisonous. Where had they been when Ethan lay in a hospital bed fighting for breath? Where had they been when I begged for help with meals or gas money? Where had they been when he asked about his grandparents on Christmas? They had chosen silence then, but now they found their voices. I typed back. My family was one boy. He is gone. Do not ever use his name to justify this. Then I put the phone down and turned it face down so I would not have to see the light of another message. I walked into Ethan's room. His toys still sat on the shelves, his favorite action figures lined up like soldiers waiting for him to return. The blanket with cartoon characters lay folded on the bed. I sat down and pressed my face into it, breathing in the faint scent that still lingered. My chest ached so badly I thought it might crack open. I pulled out my wallet and unfolded the picture he had drawn for me in the hospital. It was crude, made with markers, but it showed us hand in hand. Both of us in capes, smiling. At the bottom he had written, Dad and me superheroes. I whispered to the drawing, no son. You would never have wanted this. Not for them. Not for me. The phone buzzed again in the other room. I did not move. I let it ring and buzz and echo into the emptiness of the house until the sound finally stopped. The night grew colder. I sat in that small bed surrounded by his things, refusing to give in to the pull of their demands. My boy's voice was louder than theirs, even in death. That would be enough to keep me steady for now. Morning light seeped through the blinds, but I had not really slept. My head throbbed heavy with grief and the sharp aftertaste of anger. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder Sarah had given me years ago. The one I had kept tucked away in the safe like it was some fragile secret. The words across the front were simple, printed in black ink. Ethan Carter, Jr., Education Trust. Sarah and I had set it up when Ethan was only 3. Back then we were still married, still trying to make things work. She had insisted we prepare for his future even if life pulled us apart. She worked as a teacher. Money was never abundant, but she was practical. With the help of her uncle, who was a financial advisor, we put aside what we could. Over the years, through Sarah's discipline and a few windfalls, the account grew. By the time Ethan got sick, the trust held over $850,000 earmarked for one thing, only his education. I flipped through the pages now, the legal language thick and formal. Irrevocable, the document said. That word had once given me comfort, knowing no one could drain it for anything other than Ethan's schooling. Then my eyes found section 4.2 highlighted in yellow. In the event of the beneficiary's death, the remainder of the trust shall pass in full to Daniel Carter, father of the beneficiary. My name in bold type, undeniable. I traced the letters with my finger, the reality sinking deeper. This money, his money, was now under my care. It was not meant for weddings or luxury or family pride. It was meant to carry the legacy of a boy who dreamed of becoming a doctor, who told me in the hospital he wanted to help kids like him. The phone rang, pulling me from the papers. Jason Walker's name lit up the screen. I answered, my voice rough. He spoke with the calm tone of a lawyer who had seen too many betrayals. Daniel, I heard from one of my contacts. If your parents push this, they might try to get their hands on an older draft of the trust. They would have no legal standing, but if they forged or twisted something, it could drag you into a fight. My grip on the phone tightened. You think they'd actually go that far? Jason sighed. I don't want to believe it either, but families do worse when money is involved. Keep the originals safe. Lock them down. I promised him I would. When we hung up, I slid the folder back into the safe in my bedroom closet, spinning the dial until the lock clicked shut. That evening, Angela knocked on my door. She stood there with a container of stew, her expression hesitant. I invited her in, grateful for any company. As we sat at the table, she stirred her soup slowly and cleared her throat. Daniel, I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but I overheard something earlier today. Her eyes flicked up to mine and I felt my chest tighten. Go on. I was leaving the grocery store, she said, when I passed your mother. She didn't see me. She was on the phone talking to someone about the wedding. Angela hesitated, then added, she said the trust would cover the reception costs at the Grand Horizon Hotel. The spoon slipped from my hand, clattering against the bowl. Are you sure? I'm sure, Angela said softly. She even mentioned the name Ethan's trust. My stomach turned at the thought, the audacity of using my son's name like it was some kind of bank account for their celebration. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to steady my breathing. Angela reached across the table, her hand warm on mine. You need to be careful, Daniel. They're not thinking of you or of him. The stew went cold between us, untouched. My mind spun with images, my mother's text, the contract language. Ethan's smile in that photo on the mantel. They wanted to strip his memory for profit, to turn his future into a down payment on chandeliers and champagne. That night I sat in Ethan's room again, surrounded by his toys. I held the superhero drawing in my lap, my son's crooked handwriting staring back at me. Dad and me, superheroes. I whispered to the drawing, I will guard what you left behind. They won't take this from you. The house creaked in the winter wind. I checked the safe once more before bed, ensuring the documents were locked away. As I closed the closet door, a cold certainty settled in me. My family was preparing for war and they had chosen the battlefield. I would be ready. The house was too quiet. Every corner echoed with the absence of my son. Every wall seemed to breathe with memories that would not let me rest. I sat on the living room couch with his framed picture pressed against my chest, the smile in that photo cutting through me like glass. My thumb brushed over the glass as if I could smooth away the distance between us. The glow from my phone lit the room. I should have turned it off, but I didn't. Against my better judgment, I opened it and scrolled. My brother's wedding photos filled the screen. Michael stood at the center of a grand ballroom at the Grand Horizon Hotel, his new wife beaming in a white gown that seemed to spill across the marble floor. Chandeliers sparkled above them, casting golden light over a sea of guests in tuxedos and gowns. There were tables lined with flowers. Towers of champagne glasses stacked like crystal pyramids, and a live band in the corner smiling as they played. My parents stood near the couple, glowing with pride, their arms linked with relatives I had not seen in years. Their faces told a story of joy and triumph, as if nothing in the world had gone wrong. I scrolled faster, picture after picture, each one a knife. Guests laughing, plates of food so extravagant I could smell the richness through the screen, champagne raised in toasts. The captions were worse. Family first. A day to remember. Celebrating love. I felt my stomach turn. Just hours earlier, I had stood alone at a grave with only Angela beside me, listening to the dirt fall on the coffin of my 9-year-old son. No music, no flowers, no joy, just the hollow scrape of shovels and the silence of people who chose to stay away. The contrast was unbearable. I dropped the phone on the couch and pressed my face into Ethan's picture, choking back the anger that threatened to consume me. My son had been worth more than all the chandeliers in that ballroom, more than any wedding dress or toast. Yet they had chosen the dance floor over his grave. The phone buzzed again, an email this time. I wiped my eyes and picked it up. At first I almost deleted it without opening, but the subject line froze me. Grand Horizon Wedding Contract. It was from the wedding planner, addressed to Michael and my parents. But I noticed something strange. My email had been copied into the thread, probably by accident. My heart pounded as I opened it. The body of the email was polite and professional, thanking them for confirming the final arrangements. Attached was an updated invoice. My eyes scanned down the page until they stopped on one line. Source of funds: Ethan Carter Jr., Education Trust. The air left my lungs. I stared at the words again, unable to believe what I was seeing. There it was, in black and white, my son's name tied to a wedding banquet, as if his life and his struggle had been reduced to a budget line for champagne and floral arrangements. I dropped the phone into my lap and covered my face with both hands. My pulse hammered in my ears, my jaw clenched until it ached. They had crossed from betrayal into theft, dragging my son's memory into their greed. I stood and began pacing the room, the floorboards creaking under my steps. Each turn fueled the fire burning hotter inside me. The trust was not theirs. It was mine to protect, mine to honor for the boy who would never see another birthday. I picked the phone back up, staring at the invoice until my hands shook. My brother's name, my parents' names, the hotel, all of it linked to a fraud so bold it made me dizzy. For a moment I thought about calling them, screaming into the phone until my voice broke. But then I remembered the silence at the hospital, the empty pews at the funeral, the messages that spoke only of money. They would not hear me. They had already made their choice. Instead, I saved the email, dragging it into a folder where I began gathering every scrap of evidence. Contracts, texts, messages. I knew I would need it all. Jason had been right. They were ready to fight dirty. I sank back onto the couch, Ethan's photo still on the table beside me, his eyes smiling into mine. I whispered to him in the dim light of the room, "I see what they're doing, buddy. I won't let them win." Outside, the city lights flickered in the distance. Somewhere across town, the music from that ballroom was still playing. Glasses, still clinking, laughter, still spilling into the night. Two worlds, one drowning in grief, the other drowning in champagne. I stayed where I was, holding the photo of my son, and let the silence of my world swallow me whole. The silence stretched long into the night until it finally pulled me backward into places I had buried. Memories of my childhood rose up uninvited, jagged and sharp. I saw Michael, younger than me by 3 years, standing in our parents' living room in Boulder, with a brand new baseball glove on his hand, the kind that cost more than my entire summer job's paycheck. I had wanted one too, but my father patted me on the shoulder and said, "Maybe next year, Daniel. Michael is the athlete. You'll understand." It had always been like that. Michael the golden child, the pride, the promise. I was the afterthought, If he wanted something, he got it. If I wanted something, I had to earn it, and even then it often slipped away. Teachers called him gifted, coaches praised his talent. I was just there filling space. I remembered the day I was accepted into community college while Michael got a full scholarship to the University of Colorado. My parents beamed at him, took him out to dinner at a steakhouse, told everyone they knew. When I showed them my acceptance letter, my mother said flatly, "That's nice, honey, but maybe you should think about trade school." The pattern never changed. Holidays, birthdays, even simple dinners, Michael was the sun and I was the shadow. By the time I was an adult, I stopped trying to compete. I left home, found my own life, married Sarah, and tried to forget that I had once been a son, too. Now, sitting in my empty house, those memories cut deeper, because I could see the same favoritism fueling what was happening. Michael was still their pride, their reason, their excuse. Ethan had never stood a chance against that kind of blindness. The phone rang, startling me out of the haze. The caller ID read Emily Carter. My cousin. I hesitated before answering. Her voice was hushed, urgent. Daniel, I shouldn't be calling, but I have to tell you something. I leaned forward. What is it, Emily? I was at my parents' house a few months back when Ethan was in the hospital. I overheard Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert talking with Michael. They were worried Ethan wouldn't make it. She paused, her voice catching. They said if that happened, the trust could be redirected to help Michael. They were already planning it. My chest tightened, so it wasn't just impulsive. No, she said quickly. They were discussing it openly, like it was practical. Like Ethan's death was just an opportunity. I closed my eyes, fury pulsing in my temples. Thank you for telling me, Emily. I mean it. She whispered, be careful. They don't care who gets hurt as long as Michael looks good. Then she hung up. I sat there gripping the phone, my jaw locked, my body shaking with something beyond anger. This was not a misunderstanding. This was premeditated. They had been circling like vultures while my son was still alive, counting down days that should have been filled with hope, not greed. I stood and went to the closet, dragging out the fireproof safe. My hands were clumsy on the dial, but I managed to open it and pull out the folder again. I spread the documents across the kitchen table, page after page of legal jargon, signatures, notary stamps. I knew the main trust was airtight, but something gnawed at me. Digging deeper into the stack, I found an older version, yellowed slightly from age. My breath caught. This was the original draft, written before Sarah had amended it with her uncle's help. The language was looser, the beneficiary clause vague. It named Ethan Jr. as the primary, but the remainder after his death was not clearly defined. It simply said the assets would be distributed to surviving family without naming me specifically. My stomach dropped. This was what Jason had warned me about. If my parents had a copy of this version, they could wave it around to claim authority. Legally, it would not override the amended trust, but it would muddy the waters enough to scare banks or vendors into believing them. I ran my finger down the page, the ink still crisp, the trap hidden in plain sight. I remembered Sarah's frustration when she had pushed for the amendment years ago. She had insisted on clarity. At the time, I thought she was just being cautious, but now I realized she had seen further than I ever could. She had protected us from exactly this moment. I gathered both documents, laying the old and the new side by side. The difference was obvious to me, but to anyone outside it could create doubt, confusion, leverage. The weight of it pressed down on me. My parents had not just chosen a wedding over a funeral. They had been laying the groundwork to rob Ethan's future long before the dirt covered his coffin. I leaned back in the chair, my fists clenching the edge of the table until my knuckles ached. This was no longer grief mixed with anger. It was war, and I could feel the lines being drawn with perfect clarity. I slid the old draft into a separate envelope, locking it away again. I knew I needed to show Jason. He had to see what they might try to use. The night outside pressed against the windows, heavy and black. I sat there in the dim kitchen light, staring at the safe, my son's photo propped beside the folders. His eyes, forever frozen in that smile, seemed to watch me. I whispered to him, "They were planning this even when you were fighting. But I will not let them win." The words settled into the quiet, a vow heavier than any prayer. I sat staring at the phone on the table, the old draft of the trust still locked away, my pulse drumming louder than the silence. I had avoided speaking directly to them since the funeral, choosing instead to let their messages sit unanswered. But the weight of Emily's warning and the evidence of their plotting left me with no choice. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen before I finally pressed the call button. It rang twice before my mother's voice came through, clipped and impatient. "Daniel." I kept my tone steady, though my jaw was tight. "I know the law. I am the sole beneficiary. Do not try to take that money." There was a pause, and then her voice hardened. "Michael is the son we are proud of. He is building a family, carrying our name forward. You should be willing to sacrifice for him." The words stung, even though I had heard versions of them my entire life. I forced myself not to let the silence linger. This isn't about sacrifice. This is about Ethan. His trust was for him, for his future. He is gone now, and that responsibility falls to me. In the background, I heard the muffled baritone of my father, Robert. He must have been on speakerphone. "This is about honor, Daniel. About family. Do you want people to think you are selfish?" My grip on the phone tightened. "You want to talk about honor? Where were you when your grandson was in the hospital bed? Where were you when we buried him? Family does not abandon their own." For a moment, the line went quiet. Then I heard another voice. "Michael." His tone was hesitant, softer than I remembered. "Daniel. Just my name, nothing more." His voice hung there, almost pleading but hollow, like he wanted to step in, but had no courage to follow through. I pressed the phone harder to my ear. "Michael, you know what they are trying to do. You know it is wrong." Silence. "Say something," I demanded, my voice rising. "Tell me you do not want this. Tell me you are not willing to use Ethan's name for your wedding." Still nothing. Just the faint sound of breathing, the background hum of the house I had once called my childhood home. The silence was worse than words. It told me everything I needed to know. He knew, he understood, and he chose not to fight them. My mother broke the quiet. "Stop putting this on your brother. He has enough to handle. You are making this harder than it has to be." My father added, "You will bring the papers or we will handle it without you." The fury in me threatened to spill over. I spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "You will not touch that trust. If you try, I will make sure the truth comes out, every word of it." My mother's laugh was short and cold. "Truth does not matter if no one believes you." I ended the call before she could say more, slamming the phone onto the table so hard it rattled the glass of water beside it. My chest heaved, anger and grief tangling until I could hardly breathe. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes. Michael's silence replayed in my head. Louder than any insult. He had a chance to stop this, to stand with me, and he chose comfort instead. He chose them. Outside the window, the street was dark, the snow from earlier still glinting faintly under the streetlight. Inside, I felt the fracture of my family widen until it was beyond repair. I pressed my hand to Ethan's picture on the mantel, whispering under my breath, "They will not take what is yours." The house answered only with its own stillness, but I felt the vow settle deeper, sharper than ever before. The next morning I drove downtown, the streets slick with leftover snow, my jaw set tight against the cold air. I had called the wedding planner's office the night before, pretending to be following up on the Carter account. To my surprise, the assistant told me the planner herself was available and could meet me if I came in person. Her office was on the 12th floor of a glass building that overlooked the city. I walked through the lobby, my reflection following me in the marble floors until I reached a suite with a gold plaque that read Clara Henderson Events. The receptionist led me inside and asked me to wait. Clara came out a few minutes later, polished and smiling, a clipboard in her hand. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes that flicked over me as if measuring what kind of client I might be. "Mr. Carter, thank you for coming in," she said brightly. "I understand you're following up on some of the billing details for the Grand Horizon wedding." I nodded, forcing a calm expression. "Yes, that's right. I just wanted to be absolutely sure everything was settled properly. It was important that no mistakes were made." She glanced down at her clipboard, flipping through a few pages. "Well, from what I see here, everything looks in order. Your parents assured me that funds would be available." The words scraped against my chest. I leaned forward slightly. "Which funds did they say would be used?" She didn't hesitate. "The education trust. They told me since your son had passed, it would be available for the wedding expenses." Her casual tone made my blood run hot, but I kept my face steady. "I see," I said carefully. "And you have that in writing?" She tapped her clipboard, then reached for a folder on the desk. "Of course. We require a signed confirmation for all our large events." She pulled out a contract, slid it across the table, and pointed to a section near the bottom. My eyes fell on the words printed there. "Source of funds, Ethan Carter, Jr., Education Trust." My heart sank into my stomach. It was real, undeniable. They hadn't just talked about it, they had signed documents tying my son's name to their celebration. Clara mistook my silence for approval. "We're very thorough here," she said, smiling again. "Your family wanted everything perfect for Michael's special day." I forced myself to respond, my voice low. "Could I take a copy of this just for my records?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Normally, we don't provide documents directly to family members outside of the contracting party. But since your name is on the trust, I don't see why not." She slipped the contract into a copier behind her desk and handed me the duplicate. I folded the paper carefully, slipping it into my coat pocket as if it were something fragile. My hands trembled, but I kept my composure long enough to shake her hand and leave the office. Out in the hallway, I leaned against the wall, the contract burning like fire against my chest. The betrayal was no longer just suspicion, no longer whispers or overheard conversations. It was ink on paper, official and deliberate. I rode the elevator down, the fluorescent lights above buzzing faintly. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked hollow, my eyes dark with exhaustion and fury. By the time the doors opened onto the lobby, I felt like I could barely stand. The cold air outside slapped my face as I stepped onto the street. I pulled the paper out of my pocket and read it again, my breath clouding the page. There was Ethan's name reduced to a financial instrument for champagne fountains and flower arrangements. I folded it back and shoved it deep into my coat, clutching it tight as I walked to my car. The city moved around me, people laughing, cars honking, the ordinary rhythm of life. None of them knew the war unfolding inside me. When I slid into the driver's seat, I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and let the weight of it press down. They had crossed every line. They had used his name, his trust, his memory, and they had done it with pride. I sat there for a long time, the contract still clutched in my hands, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. I drove straight to Jason's office, the contract still burning in my pocket. The elevator ride up felt endless, every floor another reminder of how deep this betrayal cut. By the time I pushed open his office door, Jason was already on his feet, his brow furrowed. "You look like hell," he said. "What happened?" I dropped the copy of the wedding contract on his desk. "They signed it, Jason. They put Ethan's trust down as the source of payment." He unfolded the papers, scanned them quickly, then let out a sharp breath. "Damn it, Daniel. This is worse than I thought." My hands curled into fists. "Tell me what it means." He pulled a thick folder from his shelf, flipping through until he found the original trust documents. Listen, the irrevocable education trust Sarah set up was solid. After Ethan passed, you became the remainder beneficiary. That's locked. That's law. But here's the problem. He tapped the contract I brought. If they submit the outdated trust documents, they might trick a bank into believing they have authority to access the funds. So they're forging. Exactly. The old trust isn't valid anymore, but if they disguise it right, they can try to cash out before anyone questions it. My stomach tightened, bile rising. They're actually willing to commit fraud. Jason looked me dead in the eyes. "Don't underestimate them. If they already signed contracts with vendors, they'll push hard to make the money appear." The door creaked and Angela stepped in quietly, her cane tapping the hardwood. "I called her Jason," explained. "We need witnesses." Angela lowered herself into a chair, her voice steady. "I heard your mother, Daniel. She was on the phone with the wedding planner telling her the trust would cover the reception. I didn't want to believe it, but I can't stay silent." Her words cut through me like glass. "Thank you, Angela. I don't know what I'd do without you." Jason leaned back, thinking fast. "With Angela's testimony and this contract, we have enough to build a case, but we need to move fast." His phone buzzed. He picked it up and I watched his expression darken. "What is it?" I asked, my chest tight. He set the phone down slowly, his jaw clenched. "Daniel, it just got worse. Your parents already filed the old trust with First Colorado Bank. They're requesting a withdrawal." The room seemed to tilt, the air sucked out of my lungs. They weren't just planning. They were already trying to take Ethan's money. Jason leaned forward, his voice sharp now. "We have to act immediately. If the bank processes that withdrawal, it could take months to untangle, and by then the money will be gone." I gripped the edge of his desk so hard my knuckles whitened. My family had crossed every boundary, and now they were coming for the last piece of my son that remained. Angela reached across the table, her wrinkled hand covering mine. "You fight this, Daniel. Don't let them bury him again." I nodded slowly, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The war was no longer just in my head or my heart. It was in the courts now, and I was ready to fight. The night of the wedding arrived colder than expected, the Denver air sharp against my face as I stood outside the glowing hotel. The grand horizon looked like something pulled from another world, its tall glass facade lit up in gold, the sound of laughter and music spilling out every time the doors opened. I clenched the folder in my hand. The documents inside heavier than stone. Walking into that lobby felt like stepping into a theater where I already knew the ending. Guests moved past me in shimmering gowns and black tuxedos, their perfume and cologne mixing into a haze of wealth. They glanced at me but looked away quickly, sensing maybe that I was not part of the celebration. The ballroom doors were wide open and I could see everything at once. Tables lined with white roses and flickering candles, a stage with a live jazz band, a dance floor already crowded with smiling guests. At the center of it all stood Michael, my brother, in a tailored black tuxedo with a satin bow tie. His bride Rachel wore a gown that glittered under the chandeliers, her hand hooked proudly in his arm. And there they were, my parents, Robert and Linda Carter, beaming in the front row as if nothing dark lingered beyond these walls. My mother's pearl necklace glimmered as she laughed with relatives, my father's posture stiff and commanding as he shook hands with old colleagues. I stepped inside, the sound of my shoes muted against the thick carpet. Heads began to turn. The room carried on for a moment, but then the music seemed quieter, the laughter fading as eyes landed on me. Michael's smile faltered when he saw me. I walked steadily toward the front, my face calm, my hands tight around the folder. I stopped just short of the stage where the officiant had been preparing his notes and turned to face the crowd. My voice cut through the hum. Before you all raise another glass, there is something you should see. My parents stiffened. My mother's smile froze, her eyes narrowing in warning. I pulled the contract from the folder and held it high. This is the agreement signed by Robert and Linda Carter with this hotel, naming Ethan Carter Jr. Education Trust as the source of funds. My son's trust. My dead son's name. Gasps rippled through the guests. Michael's bride's hand dropped from his arm. I laid the paper flat on the podium and pulled another page free. Section 4.2 of the amended trust, signed and notarized. It states clearly that upon Ethan's death, I am the sole remainder beneficiary, not them, not Michael, me. Jason stepped forward from the back of the room, his presence solid. He raised his hand. As Daniel's attorney, I can confirm this is legally binding. What his parents attempted was fraud. Voices filled the ballroom. Whispers, shock, heads turning. Some guests pulled out their phones, taking photos, recording. My mother's face flushed red, my father's jaw clenched as if he could crush his own teeth. I looked directly at Michael. You knew. You stayed silent while they dragged Ethan's name through mud just to pay for your champagne. Michael opened his mouth, but no words came. His bride stared at him in disbelief, her eyes wide, her cheeks pale. My mother stepped forward, her voice sharp. Stop this, Daniel. You are embarrassing your family. I turned to her, my voice low but clear. My family was buried 3 days ago in a coffin too small. You were not there. Do not speak to me about embarrassment. Gasps again, louder this time. A few guests backed away from my parents, whispering among themselves. Michael's bride took a step back from him, her hand slipping away. I could see the panic in his eyes, the sweat forming along his hairline. The band had stopped playing. The room was thick with silence, heavy and suffocating. I closed the folder and tucked it under my arm. I will not let you steal from Ethan. The trust will remain untouched, and now everyone here knows what you tried to do. The finality of my words seemed to hang in the air, undeniable. My parents' faces were masks of fury and humiliation. Michael's shoulders slumped as if the weight of the room had finally crushed him. The crowd stirred, whispers turning to outright condemnation, the shine of the celebration replaced by the shadow of shame. I turned and walked out, the sound of my steps echoing across the ballroom floor, leaving the music, the flowers, and the wreckage of their lies behind me. The air outside the ballroom was colder than before, the night pressing down heavy on my shoulders. I paused in the lobby, catching my breath, hearing the muffled chaos still unraveling behind those double doors. I should have left, walked straight into the street, and never looked back. But some force held me there, listening. The voices grew sharper inside, and then the doors burst open as guests spilled out their whispers, carrying judgment that could not be contained. I turned and saw my mother at the entrance, her face flushed, her pearls trembling against her neck as she shouted above the crowd. This was for the family. Everything we did was for the family. I stepped closer, my voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. "What family, Mom? When my son was dying, where were you? When we buried him, where were you? You talk about family now, but when it mattered, you chose a ballroom over his grave." Gasps spread through the crowd. Some guests looked at the floor. Others shook their heads in disgust. Eyes turned on Robert, my father, who stood rigid but silent, his jaw locked, unable to command the room the way he once could. My mother's face twisted, but before she could speak again, Michael pushed forward. His bow tie hung loose, his bride standing several steps away with her arms crossed, her face pale with shame. He looked at me, his voice low, but the microphone left behind on the podium carried it across the room. "I didn't want this, Daniel, but they pushed me. They said if I didn't go along, I would be letting the family down." The admission hung in the air, raw and pathetic. His bride's eyes widened, tears brimming, and she turned from him, muttering something I couldn't hear. A ripple of murmurs spread through the guests, harsh words like disgrace and unbelievable echoing in the air. I stared at my brother, my chest tight with both anger and sorrow. "You had a choice. You could have stood up even once. But you stayed quiet because it was easier. You let them use Ethan's name for your party." Michael's lips trembled. He glanced at our parents, but they gave him nothing, only stone faces that left him alone in the fire. I shook my head slowly. "You're not a victim, Michael. You're just like them." The silence was unbearable, broken only by the shuffling of guests gathering their coats, some already leaving the ballroom behind. Their celebration was over, replaced by a public trial none of them could escape. My mother tried again, her voice cracking. "Daniel, please, you don't understand. This was about survival, about keeping the Carter name strong." I felt something inside me finally snap. The Carter name means nothing to me anymore. Ethan was my family. He was the only one who mattered. And all of you proved tonight you don't even understand what family is. The crowd parted as I turned and walked through them, their eyes following me, their whispers cutting deeper into the ruins of what had once been my bloodline. Behind me, Michael's bride pulled her hand free from his grasp, shaking her head as tears streaked her makeup. I reached the doors to the street and pushed them open, the cold night air rushing into my lungs like a baptism. For the first time since Ethan's funeral, I felt something shift inside me. Not peace, not forgiveness, but clarity. The ballroom noise faded behind me, replaced by the hum of the city headlights passing by, a siren in the distance. My parents' voices were gone, Michael's silence no longer choking me. I walked into the night, leaving them behind in the wreckage they had built, their pride shattered, their reputations in ruins. Their celebration turned into a spectacle of shame. The next morning I drove to Greenwood Cemetery, the early sun still low over the snow-covered ground. The silence there was different from the kind in my house. Softer somehow, as if the world held its breath in respect. I carried fresh white lilies in my arms, the same kind Ethan had once pointed at in the park and called angel flowers. His headstone stood small but strong, carved simply with his name, Ethan Carter, Jr., and the dates that would forever feel too short. I knelt in the frost, brushing the snow from the stone, and placed the lilies gently at its base. My breath misted in the cold air as I whispered to him, "It's done, son. They tried to take what was yours, but they failed. I protected it just like I promised I always would." Angela arrived a few minutes later, her cane crunching soolly against the gravel, Jason walking beside her with his hands in his coat pockets. They stood quietly behind me until I looked up. Angela's voice was warm but trembling. "He would be proud of you, Daniel, more proud than any of them could ever understand." Jason nodded, pulling an envelope from his coat. I filed the scholarship paperwork this morning. The Ethan Carter Jr. Education Scholarship is official. Local kids will get the chance your boy never had. His name will live on in the classrooms where he once dreamed of being a superhero. I took the envelope from him, my hands shaking, my eyes burning. Thank you, both of you. You were there when no one else was. We stood there in silence for a while, the winter wind whispering through the trees, the city faint in the distance. I thought of Ethan's laugh, the way he used to run down the hospital hallway in his superhero cape, the way he would squeeze my hand and tell me it was okay. Karma did not wait long. Within weeks, Michael's small real estate business began collapsing. His clients pulling out after the scandal at his wedding made its way across town. The event company that hosted his reception saw contracts canceled, their reputation sinking fast. My parents became pariahs in their own neighborhood, whispers following them in the grocery store. Invitations vanishing, old friends keeping their distance. I did not celebrate their downfall. It was not joy I felt, only the cold symmetry of consequences. They had chosen money over love, appearances over truth, and the world had seen them for what they were. I stayed by Ethan's grave until the sun climbed higher, the warmth melting the frost around his stone. My voice broke as I spoke one last time. I kept my promise, Ethan. I protected what was yours, and I will keep protecting your name for as long as I live. Angela rested her hand on my shoulder. Jason bowed his head, and together we stood in the stillness. Three people bound by love and loss and the unshakable memory of a boy who had deserved so much more. When I finally walked away from that grave, I carried no weight of guilt, no shadow of shame. Only clarity and the steady beat of my son's legacy alive in the future of others. If it were you, if your own family chose money over love, what would you do to protect justice? Thank you for listening to Ethan's story. If his legacy touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so more stories of truth and resilience can be told.